Welcome to the Geobreeze Travel Podcast, a show for anyone wanting to level up their travel hacking lifestyle. I'm your host, Julia Menez. I'm a travel hacker, coach, speaker, Filipino-American ENTJ who loves solid travel gear and using shortcuts on spreadsheets. On this show, I'm on a mission to bring you travel hackers from all walks of life to help you level up your travel hacking game. We dive into credit cards, miles, points, strategy, mindset, and the secrets behind how to travel the world for next to no cost. So, let's get hacking.
Domestic, it's pretty easy. So that's probably the easiest way to redeem Qantas points domestically because there's a reasonable amount of availability all the time. I think most people, though, will save up their points for international trips because obviously they're more expensive, much longer flights. So that's what a lot of people save up for. And then it becomes quite tricky as to, availability, especially on like flights from Sydney to the US. It's almost impossible to find seats on Qantas often. They do reserve a certain amount of seats for their gold and platinum frequent flyers. And if you're on one of the higher tiers like platinum or platinum 1, you can even call them up and request for a seat to be opened up, which they do on occasion. But for, everyone else, it's bottom of the food chain.
Hey there, points people. You just heard a clip from Immanuel Debeer from Flight Hacks. Immanuel is originally from Belgium and now lives in Perth, Australia, where he runs Flight Hacks as a full-time blogger. He is also the co-founder of a bill payment platform in Australia called Frequent Pay, which allows business customers to pay anyone using their rewards credit cards. In this episode, Immanuel and I discuss the best ways to fly between the United States and Australia on points and the unique challenges that often make these routes difficult. We will be discussing the routes, airline products, and of course, how to do it all on points. One of the airlines most associated with Australia is Qantas Airlines, and pretty much everyone other than Chase points transfer there. You can use American Express, Citi, or Capital One. With these currencies, some of the most popular cards to use for points and miles are the Amex Gold, Citi Premier, and Capital One Venture X. Remember, if you decide to apply for any of these cards, never apply directly through Google. Always support your friends and favorite creators by using their referral and affiliate links. And if you're interested in supporting this show when you apply for your next card, check out geobreezetravel.com/cards. And now, on with the show. Hey, Immanuel, welcome to the Geobreeze Travel Podcast.
Hey, Julia, thanks for having me on.
Of course. I'm so excited to have you on today. And we're going to be talking all about Australia and how to travel there on points and miles, which I know is a bucket list points destination for a lot of people, and one that is kind of tricky to do, harder than people would actually expect. So before we get into all of that, tell us a little bit about your background and how did you get into the game of points and miles?
Yes, I've lived in Australia for, I think, just over 10 years, 11 years maybe. As you can hear by my accent, I'm not Australian. I probably got a little bit of an Australian twang going on. I'm from Belgium originally. So I got into the points game when I moved to Australia and discovered that these people had credit cards with points and I was missing out. And I was like, hold on, how can I be part of this and get up the front of those planes? Because, all I wanted to do was fly in business or first class. Traveling back and forth between Belgium and Australia is quite far. So always being in the back seat, I'm like, how can I get to the front without having to pay all the money that those tickets usually cost? So that's how I got started. And I guess my brain is kind of wired in a way where if I see an opportunity in a loophole, I just want to maximize it as much as possible and just learn more about it. So I kind of got obsessed by it. And then a hobby turned into a full-time career. So I do this full-time now. And yeah, not sure how that happened, but here we are.
Did you start off by blogging or YouTube, or how did you kind of get into the content creation side of it?
For me, it's blogging. So my main job is my website. The Instagram side and the YouTube side, it's more, I guess, a display of my lifestyle and what I do, my points, but it's not so much an income for me. So I work on my website most of the time, and that's what I do. It all started with my first affiliate link from an American Express card that I had at the time, and I just wanted to earn some points. So then my background is in digital media and SEO, so I ranked an article. That was the only thing I had on the site at the time, which was the card that I had, and I earned some points on that on the site. So that's how I got started.
Before we jump into all of the Australia content, I know we have a lot of people who sometimes ask about, is this available at all for people in Europe? Like if somebody were living in Belgium, do you have access to any cards there?
Look, it's much harder in Europe because the way credit card systems work is obviously they have to make money from someone. And in Europe, there's a lot of, how do you say, there's caps on how much banks and interchange rates can be. So it's quite limited for financial providers to make a decent amount of money from those transactions. So that's why they can't offer as many points as they can in countries such as the US and Australia, and then to, I guess, a lesser extent, Canada and Singapore, all these sort of, I'd say, countries where frequent flyer credit cards are really big. It's where they have a good system where everyone can profit along the way, basically. It's definitely not impossible. I think Germany is probably the leading country in Europe where you can earn points, but otherwise, looking into buying miles for luxury travel can sometimes make sense as well.
So, what were some of the resources that you first started when you moved to Australia and you were like, how do I do this? How do I learn about points and miles?
Yeah, so a lot of the content is was from the US, definitely. In Australia, I quickly connected with sort of like-minded people that were also in the space and enthusiastic about earning frequent flyer points. There is a forum that I used to read or still read sometimes, and of course there's Fly Talk in the US that have Australian sections as well. But it's all about meeting like-minded people and sort of connecting on a personal level and sharing tips. That I think that's the fastest way people can learn is by actually connecting in person or online. We still have a chat group where we have a bunch of people. It's a private chat where we talk on a daily basis about points, and because we have that shared passion and shared connection over something that we all enjoy talking about, it really works out.
When you were first getting started with points and miles, were there any mistakes that you made where you want to tell people, don't do what I did?
I think we all do that. It's my first ever redemption was before Australia. I used to live in New Zealand, and I flew back and forward twice a year, and it was always with, I believe it was Singapore Airlines at the time. And the only program that I knew about was Miles and More from Lufthansa, so I would credit my flights there. And at one stage, I think it was 30,000 miles just from flying, and I was like, "What do I do with this?" And I looked on the shop, and I was like, I'll just buy a digital camera, which, which at the time, it was something that would have cost me a couple $100, but I spent all the miles that I had earned from flying on that, and probably didn't even use the camera to be honest. Bit of a mistake. It's not the worst. It's not the best. Yeah, I think everyone does one of these stupid things at
We've had
one
people on the
stage.
show say that they redeem points for magazine subscriptions. So,
Yeah, at least it's not a toaster or a treadmill or something like that. In Australia, we have a going joke where um, there is what we call the Qantas shopping mall, and they have these really fancy toasters on there, which cost I think around 40 something thousand points. And so the joke is that you can either get 5 toasters or a business class ticket to Europe. Which one would you pick?
so speaking of Qantas, tell us a little bit about the product for people who are not familiar.
In Australia, the biggest frequent flyer program is obviously Qantas because it's the biggest airline in the country. And of course, they're international as well. They are a transfer partner on the American Express US cards. I'm not sure. I only know about the American Express, but maybe you know of other cards that have transfer options to Qantas. I'm not sure.
Yeah, American Express is the main one. And then we'll talk about different transfer partners as well, because you can actually use Alaska Miles to book some partner availability on Qantas, and you can use
Yeah.
American Airlines because it's part of One World. So if you can transfer points over to British Airways from Chase or something like that, you can sometimes book those partner flights to fly on Qantas, but it's tricky, as we will discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. So being the biggest airline, they also have the biggest frequent flyer program. I think almost everyone in the country is a Qantas frequent flyer, which is their loyalty program, and it's huge. So they have, it's much more profitable than the airline, as with many airlines is the case, and it's pretty much everywhere. You can't turn around the corner without earning Qantas points these days. So you earn it on everything from shopping to insurance, petrol, credit cards, obviously, and last but not least, flying. You also earn there. Imagine that. But yes, it's very easy for people to earn a lot of Qantas points really quickly, especially with sign-up bonuses from credit cards. Often it's more than 100,000 points. And as we know, those points are quite valuable. So, 2 or 3 cards and you have yourself a return trip to Europe or the US with Qantas points. And then it comes to the tricky part, which is, obviously redeeming very hard on Qantas themselves. But luckily, they are one world airline. So you have access to all those partners. In terms of Qantas themselves as the product, I'm not a huge fan, mostly. I think the international flights can be quite good. Domestically, it's hit and miss, but they're definitely not the best airline out there. There's much better options for sure, especially in business class and even first class, where I'm like, well, this is kind of nice business class seat you have, but it doesn't compete with the likes of Singapore Airlines in first class or Emirates in first class. It's a big leap. So it's good, but not amazing. Let's put it that way.
For anybody who wanted to do domestic flights in Australia, do you have other options than Qantas? And are they better?
There is Virgin Australia now, they've always been there, but during the pandemic, they kind of went bust and then kind of rebooted without their fancy planes. So they used to have this really nice, I think in America you call them first class seats on domestic route, and it was full on 3-course meal, the whole works. And those planes were not very profitable, so they're all gone, and it's all 737s now. So it's not that fancy. Whereas Qantas still run the A330 on east to west coast, which is 5-hour flights, and those have the full flat beds, which is nice. And then on occasion you can also get the 787 that goes from Sydney to Perth and then to Rome at the moment, or to London on those direct flights. So you can actually catch the domestic leg on that if you wanted to.
You said that in Australia, it's very easy to earn these Qantas points, Qantas miles, with whether you're buying petrol, gasoline, shopping, restaurants. Does that mean people are just easily flying for free? How easy is it to get a quick domestic flight on Qantas?
Domestic, it's pretty easy. So that's probably the easiest way to redeem Qantas points domestically, because there's a reasonable amount of availability all the time. I think most people, though, will save up their points for international trips because obviously they're more expensive, much longer flights. So that's what a lot of people save up for. And then it becomes quite tricky as to availability, especially on like flights from Sydney to the US. It's almost impossible to find seats on Qantas often. They do reserve a certain amount of seats for their gold and platinum frequent flyers. And if you're on the higher tiers like platinum or platinum 1, you can even call them up and request for a seat to be opened up, which they do on occasion.
How does somebody get that much status with Qantas? Do you just have to be flying a lot, or is there a way to do that with credit cards
Yeah,
or alliances?
you can earn status points from shopping as well. It's not a lot, so the majority has to be from flying. On occasion, I think maybe once or twice a year, Qantas do run what we call double status credits promotions, where they're offering double the amount of credits that you get. So a lot of people who buy flights during those promotions and then either do a status run or book them throughout the year, fast track themselves to those higher tiers. Personally, I don't really chase it too much because I think it is still possible to book those flights if you wanted to. Plus, the only benefit you get is on Qantas flights themselves, whereas their partners, it's the same for any one world airline where you're competing with a global audience that want those tickets. So you don't get an advantage being a Qantas Platinum member, for example, if you want to book Japan Airlines or Finnair, for example.
Yeah, Qantas, as you mentioned, can be difficult because their schedule opens up almost a year ahead of time. I
Mm.
think it's like 350 some days. And then about 22 or 23 days after that, they'll start giving any leftover availability to Alaska's program or American Airlines program, possibly British Airways, some other One World partners. And after those 22 or 23 days, if you are a Qantas frequent flyer member, you've probably grabbed most of the first class and business class availability by then. And they don't really open up at the last minute with some other availability, like Lufthansa, I think is the one that's most known for. Well, if you just wait until 2 weeks out, if you're really flexible, you can just hop on a Lufthansa first class flight that somebody cancels. That is not the case on Qantas. Is that correct?
It depends because, for example, I was talking to someone recently, and they snagged a seat from LA to Sydney at the last minute. I think it was 2 or 3 days before, and that's a few weeks ago. So it's definitely possible. I think he was platinum or gold though, so that might have been the difference, or just being there at the right time and there's a cancellation or something like that, and you just happen to find that seat. Which brings me to my favorite recommendation for people all the time. It's just use a service that monitors those flights, which is like Expert Flyer. I just set award alerts for all the routes and dates that I want, and I just sit back and wait for something to go off. And usually it does, because there's always people canceling flights. As you know, with award seats, it's very easy to cancel a ticket without incurring too much of a penalty. And so that happens all the time. And it's just a matter of knowing about it and just being there at the right time to catch those seats when they become available again.
Oh, yeah. For everybody who's like, I can never find any award availability, paying a little bit for some of those services or just using some Google Flights notifications will be good enough at some point. But figure out a system to get yourself notified if space opens up, because that's going to be really key to getting good award space. And then also being flexible, where maybe you're in New York, but a flight opens up from Chicago. You can get a quick flight from New York to Chicago and then
Yeah.
fly from Chicago to wherever you're going. So being flexible with dates as well as routes and positioning flights is really, really going to help your odds of getting some of these cool award class seats.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no point. I mean, it's fun looking every day for flights, but sometimes it just gets too much, and it's much easier to just set an alert and just monitor your inbox, and eventually something will go off.
So if Qantas isn't your favorite, what is your favorite way to fly internationally? What points programs do you focus most on personally?
So, I mean, Qantas has a lot of fun partners, being the One World Alliance for starters, and then obviously they have a very good partnership with Emirates as well. So most of the time, I use my Qantas points with Emirates to fly business or first class to Europe, which is a pretty good redemption. At the moment, not so much, because Emirates, as you maybe know, has hiked their award surcharge pricing at least 3 times now. So, for example, I just flew in Emirates first class from Singapore to Paris, and when I booked a ticket, the taxes were 270 Singapore dollars, which is what, 120 US, maybe something like that. It's not. I
I
mean, it's not bad for a one-way first class ticket that would cost you 10 grand. But those award fees have now gone up to $1,250 for the same ticket, so increased by around $1,000, um, and that's across the board with Qantas and all the other partners, including Skywards themselves. Whereas Emirates tickets are now costing a lot more than they used to. But if you're flying first class Emirates, and it might be worth the splurge. So it depends on how you value those things. In terms of my favorite programs, at the moment, I mean, for me, where I'm based in Australia, I live in Perth, so Singapore Airlines KrisFlyer is a big one for me, because it's such a short flight to Singapore, and from there I have so many connections to wherever I want to go. So KrisFlyer is a big one for me, and then Asia Miles, being another One World program, it's usually much cheaper than Qantas Frequent Flyer to redeem by Asia Miles. So I use that a lot as well.
Yeah, and the good news about Emirates and Singapore, they're so much easier for people in the US to transfer different points to. You can aggregate your Chase points and your Amex points, Capital One points into Emirates and Singapore. Asia Miles, it's a little bit tougher, But if you have the Built card, that transfers really easily to Asia Miles. And I know it's sometimes hard to earn a lot of Built points, but you don't need nearly as many Asia Miles as you said. So that could be a
Mm.
good program to
Yeah.
look into as well. And I know you mostly fly to Europe. Have you been to the US recently and why?
I was there in late 2019, just before the whole COVID thing kicked off. So I was in New York at the time. And I flew there with British Airways, first class from London. Took my dad on that one, which was quite fun. He's never flown first class before. So that was a cool experience. And then we flew back with Virgin Atlantic.
So, some other options for people who want to fly from the US to Australia. Hats up to Upgraded Points. They have a really good article about this. But you could fly United. There's a lot of United
Mm.
flights that go between the US and Australia. You can fly on ANA, route through Japan. So you
Yeah.
would transfer your Amex points over to ANA. Air Canada has some stuff that you could look into, and lots of different partners will transfer over to Air Canada. Alaska Airlines, like we said, you can use your Alaska miles to transfer to Qantas. Downside being it's kind of tricky to earn a lot of Alaska miles, as we've talked about on the show before. You could do the dining portals and the shopping portals and get like the one Alaska card and then transfer that over to Qantas. But you're going to have a 22 to 23 day lag behind everybody who's just in
Yeah.
the Qantas frequent flyer program. Much cheaper though, if you can do it through Alaska. With Qantas, you're
Oh,
going to
yeah.
get a head start, but it's going to cost more points.
I often buy Alaska points when they're on sale because I've got no way to earn them via the traditional ways that you guys have in America. But when they're on sale, it's often a good deal. And in Australia, for example, you only need 20,000 points to go from like Perth to Sydney, which is a 5-hour flight, and that's in business class, lie flat seats. So it's a bargain compared to I think Qantas charges 41,000 something points in business. So you can buy 20K Alaska miles for what is it, a few $100, and
Yeah.
that's your business class ticket sorted, which usually costs a few $1,000s. So
Yeah, if the
it's
award
often cool.
availability is there and buying the
Mm.
points is cheaper than buying the business class
Yeah.
flight, then go for it.
On a domestic leg, it's quite easy. So it's definitely good availability on those. It's just the international ones that are much harder to find.
Yeah. Avianca is also a good program, and they sell life miles all the time for like
Mm.
200% bonuses. Sometimes their tech is, it leaves some stuff to be
Oh yeah.
desired, but you can transfer to Avianca with some different programs. You can buy Avianca life miles for pretty cheap. So that's another way to book these flights if you wanted to do so as
Yeah.
well. And then
Another fun one, like you said, I think you touched on it, is ANA, and you can book those with Virgin Atlantic miles. So it is really quite cheap to fly from the US to Australia in business class with ANA, and they have like an amazing what do you call it, the room on the US routes to I think it's New York and maybe LA. The release seats vary randomly, so it just keeps on like coming up at random dates throughout the year. I don't know what the methods are that they use, but it must be something to do with how many seats they sell.
which actually makes it harder than Qantas, because at least Qantas, you know, to look 350, 355 days out, and you know when your window is. With
Yeah.
ANA, you're just like, will today be the
Could be any
day?
could be any day. It's always a nice surprise when you're like randomly looking, you're like, oh my God, I just found a seat that I wanted.
I can't believe we've already recorded more than 100 podcast episodes. It feels like we just started yesterday, but we've already covered so many great points and miles strategies on this show and have many more to come. If you're new to this show or looking to level up your points game quickly, I offer a bunch of resources at geobreezetravel.com/start here. It includes links to free consults, free trials to some of my favorite points tools, and also links to services like group coaching, which start at only $5 per session through the Patreon. Again, that's geobreezetravel.com/start here, which I have linked for you in the show notes. And speaking of the Patreon, this week's Patreon shout out goes out to Joel. Thank you so much for being a part of the Geobreeze Travel Patreon community. Yeah, I think the last one to mention was American Airlines, which we talked about a little bit, which is similar to the Alaska thing where You don't have the head start. It's cheaper than booking through Qantas's program on its own. And similar to Alaska, it can be a little tricky to earn American Airlines points because Bilt is the only major US credit card that actually transfers directly into American Airlines unless you have their specific co-branded card. But good news is there's lots of ways to earn it through shopping portals, dining portals, travel portals like Rocket Miles. So
Yeah.
different ways to do that.
Yeah, it's pretty valuable as well. I think like my favorite use for American Airlines miles is always the Etihad first class redemption. You can do Europe to Australia for it's 115,000 American Airlines miles, which is amazing value, and like $100 in taxes. It's it's nothing. So it's one of my favorite redemptions that I've done, and hopefully we can do it again once those A380s come back and bring those amazing first class apartments with them.
So I know we spent most of this episode talking about flights. Let's touch on hotels really quick. Any really good points hotels you'd recommend for Australia?
There's the iconic Park Hyatt Sydney, which is probably the best points hotel I'd say in Australia because it's got such a high room rates. They're always over $1,000 a night, so you can use your Hyatt points. You'll have to remind me what the new categories are because they recently changed, didn't they? So I think the points have gone up. It used to be 30,000.
I think it's 40,000 now because it's category
Yeah,
8.
yeah, yeah. It's a top category. So, but it's one of those iconic hotels, and it's such a good location. I don't think it's the most amazing hotel out there. So it's, if you were to pay cash, it's probably a bit underwhelming overall. But especially if you come to Australia first time, Sydney, and you get the iconic view of the Harbour Bridge and Opera House, it's such an amazing location. So it's probably worth it for a couple of nights.
Is your main hotel program that you focus on Hyatt or is it Marriott or something
Uh,
else?
for me, it's probably Marriott at the moment because the most hotels that I seem to like are Marriott, and then I've been Hilton Diamond for as long as I can remember. I'm not sure how that's happening because I don't even stay the required nights, and we don't have a credit card anymore in Australia that links with Hilton, but we used to. So I think I'm stuck in some sort of glitch in the matrix where they're still giving me status, even though I shouldn't be getting it. And then Hyatt, I'm globalist at the moment, but I'll probably lose it next year because I did it during the pandemic when they had this promotion on for the reduced qualification. So I just went for it, thinking I'll probably be able to retain it, but there's just not enough Hyatt properties in Australia, and I usually travel to Asia quite a bit. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'll be able to hit the 50 nights. The 50 nights or 70 nights?
For Hyatt Globalist, it's 60 nights.
60 nights. So I don't think I'll be able to hit it again, but it was fun while it lasted. The upgrades are always very consistent with Hyatt, I would say. It's with Marriott that I always have to kind of finesse them in the application a couple of days before I arrive. Go, hey, any chance you can pre-upgrade me to this room because it's still available? Whereas Hyatt, I just turn up, and if there's a room available, they'll just give it to you without too much of a fight. So,
Are there any favorite Marriott hotels that you can recommend in Australia?
in Australia, I mean, I'm a big fan of the Ritz Carlton in Perth, which is quite new. I mean, obviously, Perth is not the number one destination from people traveling from the US. I think it's a bit of an underrated place, but I guess everyone goes to Melbourne or Sydney. In Melbourne, there's some new Marriott properties that opened up recently that I haven't checked out, but I want to, and it's in the new W in Melbourne, and they also have, I believe it's just just a standard Marriott, but it looks quite nice and new as well. And yeah, that's probably about it. It's not as exciting as for example, Maldives or in Asia where you have a lot more selections, but it's okay for city hotels here.
Is there a different brand that maybe Americans don't stay at very often where you'd recommend, oh, this is where you should actually stay in Australia? You might not get as many loyalty points or whatever, but definitely check out this chain of hotels or boutique hotels. Are there any like that?
Yeah, it's called Luxury Lodges of Australia, and it's very high end. sort of luxury hotels that are in really unique places. So you can book them with points or earn points from it, but you're looking at like a few $1,000s a night, and it's usually like all inclusive and comes with sort of experiences on the spot. So one I tried a couple of years ago was one called Sal Salis, and it's in Western Australia. It's on the Ningaloo Reef, so it's super unique location, very remote, and it's like a tent camp that's set up there, and there's like a whole team of staff that looks after you, and they cook you breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then they take you out on excursions to check out the reef and the nearby national parks, sort of stuff like that. And they're all over Australia. I think the probably one of the iconic one is the Latitude 131 by the Uluru Rock in Alice Springs. That's very iconic as well. But yeah, it's super high end and very expensive. So it's worth it if you have the money or you want to really splurge on a unique experience, as those places are there in the location because of the location, and it's hard to get to. But once you're there, it's amazing.
What if someone listening to this is like, I do not have the money and I don't want to splurge on that? What are some like what are the budget options for people traveling to Australia?
Well, probably stick to those main brands like your Marriott's, Hyatt's, and Hilton's. There's plenty of those around, especially if you stick to the cities. Um, that's what you will find mostly. I think in terms of other luxury brands, it goes from like medium to all of a sudden a couple of $1,000s a night. So in Australia, yeah, Australia is an expensive place. So if you can book on points in those city hotels, it might be worth it. Yeah.
When I traveled to Australia, it was a while ago. I think it was 2014, first country my husband and I traveled to together. And we stayed, I don't remember the brand. I don't know if it was Novotel or something like that, but the layout of the room was literally called the shoebox. And that description was accurate. It was so small, but it was such a good location. It was right in the city center of Sydney. So we basically threw our suitcase into the room and then ate a lot of Asian food because that's what was cheap. We had a lot of noodles. Well, the first place we walked into, they were selling like some $46 Singapore crab. And we said no to that. We're going to have some roti and something just super cheap. It was $5 or
Yeah.
so per person. And my favorite thing, I think, was all of the coffee shops with like the fun signs on the outside. They're so creative with their
Mm.
marketing. There was a coffee shop that I remember walking past where there was a sign that said, "A good date ends with dinner, a great date ends with breakfast. Come get coffee." And
Yeah,
so
breakfast is quite iconic in Australia. We love, I mean, breakfast brunch. So a lot of people go out for brunch, and it's quite the event. It's also quite affordable if you compare it to going out for dinner. A brunch might be a fraction of the price, but it's going to be really amazing most times if you find a good cafe. And obviously, the coffee is exponentially better than anywhere else in the world. So
I've only been to Sydney, but it was so easy to get around with public transit because it was all integrated between the ferry system and the bus system and the train system. Is it like that in most other cities in Australia, or is Sydney special as far as public transit ease goes?
I'd say so. I find Melbourne the most annoying one to get from the airport to the city because there's no decent public transport. There's no train, let's put it that way. In Sydney, you can go down at the terminal and just jump in a train and you're in the city in 15 minutes. Whereas Melbourne, you have to either go on a bus or grab a taxi, which is going to take 30, 40 minutes. In Perth, it's also getting very easy. We're about to launch like a train system that goes from the airport directly into the city, which will be super convenient for most people. But otherwise, it's still only a 15-minute drive away. And Brisbane isn't too bad either. So I think Sydney is probably the most user friendly in terms of transportation.
If somebody wanted to do more of an outdoorsy trip and travel into the outback, how easy is it to do that with all of the different flights and everything in Australia, or does it take like quite a bit of effort to get one of those trips planned?
Definitely takes a bit of planning because you need to know where to go. And I would say like Western Australia is amazing for those outback trips where you just rent a camper van and just travel thousands of kilometers, without seeing too many people, but seeing some amazing places. It's what I've been doing a lot during the whole lockdown of the last 2 years. Been traveling a lot around our own state, which is huge. And so you definitely need some time because it's a lot of driving and some planning. And one of the main apps that I've been using is called Wiki Camps. And in Australia, we have a thing where camping is often free in rest stops, and there's some really beautiful rest stops. So you don't even have to pay for campgrounds, where there's these government provided rest stops, and you're free to sort of wander around into the bush and do your own thing as long as you're staying for one night. So it's quite useful if you want to save money. And I don't like campgrounds because I don't like to be around other people. So it's nice to get away and find your own cool spot that way.
I'm completely the opposite, where I feel like if I'm in my own camper van and there's nothing else around, something in the outback's going to come after me, whether it's a cassowary or like something else like that. For anybody who doesn't know
Yeah.
what a cassowary is, it's like the top half is an emu and the bottom half is a velociraptor. So I'm very afraid of
Yeah,
them.
there's a lot of animals in Australia that want to kill you, so you have to. But to be
I
fair,
think
I never see any of them, so yeah, I think you'll be all right.
I think 8 of the 10 deadliest animals in the world live in the outback.
Oh yeah, yeah. I got a special snake bite kit now. Never had to use it, but I've got a, and I've got a. I mean, another cool thing is you can get uh, emergency GPS beacons where you basically press a button and then someone in Canberra, which is the capital of Australia, sits there behind a computer 24/7, and they get a little ping on the map going bing, and then they send either a helicopter or someone to come and rescue you. So
That
it's,
is really
it's
good to know.
yeah,
That is the travel hacking content that people need to know if
yeah.
they're
I think it's
going
like
into the
150
outback.
bucks for this like beacon, and which gives you the battery lasts for maybe 10 years. But like in that 10 years, so 15 bucks a year for potentially life-saving device is a pretty good investment, I think.
And then you just pay the healthcare bill if you actually have to use the beacon and they have to evac you out.
Yeah, hopefully your credit card has got a good travel insurance policy.
I don't imagine it's cheap to get helicoptered out of the outback for an emergency snake bite.
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I think um yeah, it would depend on your policy.
All right. Any other tips for people who are traveling to Australia, whether it's the different cities or into the outback, just anything that you would recommend to people where maybe they don't normally hear, oh, here's an Australia travel tip?
I think a tip would be to also explore other places than the key cities because while Sydney and Melbourne are pretty cool, they're going to be very similar to American cities, I think, in a way. So it's definitely worth to check out smaller towns and explore like the real Australia where you get to, meet and interact with like a lot of very interesting characters and see some very cool places as well. Like the nature is unreal, as with many American locations as well, where probably not a lot of tourists go to, but probably should because they're so amazing. So I think if you do like some adventure and nature, then yeah, the Australian outback is definitely worth checking out. It's not just desert, but some very cool landscapes to be seen.
Yeah, for getting slightly off the beaten path, but still kind of on it.
Mm,
In Sydney, my husband and I went to a place called Cabramatta, which is like a suburb of Sydney, and it was very, very Vietnamese. Like it was the most that we felt like off the beaten path because a lot of stuff wasn't in English and the food was awesome. They had great Vietnamese coffee and the sandwiches and the pho noodles and everything were so good. So it's an easy train ride too from Sydney. So if you want to do something that people don't normally talk about much, check out the suburb of Cabramatta. Just go on like a walking food tour or just do a DIY food
yeah,
tour. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't talk about nearly enough.
Awesome. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. And with everything we talked about today and everything that you know about points and miles, as we kind of wrap up here, what would you say is your number one piece of travel hacking advice for our listeners today?
For me, I always say, with two people that say, "Oh, I can't find awards," just learn and understand Expert Flyer, pay that premium subscription. I think it's $99 a year. It can save you so much time and stress looking for award seats, which these days are very hard to come by. But if you have the edge, that's your trip sorted. So Expert Flyer. I mean, I'm not not affiliated, but I just love the program. So it's a cool tool, and I use it all the time.
Perfect. Great advice. And speaking of great advice, can you give a shout out to other people in the Points and Miles community that listeners should go follow for more Points and Miles tips?
Let me think. I'm not sure. Have you had Ricky on your show yet?
I have, but you can give him a
Uh,
shout out if you want.
I'm giving him a shout out because I do love his content, and even though he writes for a Canadian audience, like a lot of the stuff like applies internationally as well. So I always enjoy reading his stuff on hacks, and I look forward to catching up with everyone in Canada later this year as well. So that'd be fun.
Oh, yeah, I completely forgot. We're going to meet in Canada because we're both speaking at the Travel Summit, which is hosted by Ricky from Prince of
Exactly.
Travel. So, and his blog is fantastic. And I really, really like his writing style too. Some of
Yeah.
the articles are just so entertaining when he writes different reviews of hotels or his adventure of getting into La Premiere with
Yeah,
Air
that was a good one.
France. They're so entertaining. So, yeah, I look forward to seeing you in Toronto. Until then, where can people
Excellent.
find you on the internet?
You can connect with me on Instagram. That's probably the easiest way at Flight Hacks. Otherwise, my website, flighthacks.com.au. And I'm trying to find my way around TikTok these days.
This was so entertaining and so informative. Thank you so much, Emmanuel, for coming onto the show today. And I look forward to seeing you in Toronto. Until then, this will be a great resource for anybody looking to travel to Australia.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Julia. And I look forward to connecting in person in October. So I'll see you there.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Geobreeze Travel Podcast. If any of the cards mentioned in today's episode piqued your interest, please check out the links in the show notes for more information on any of the cards. Also, if you apply for a card using the links on that page, I may receive a commission too, so please and thank you. P.S. I hear the links work better in Internet Explorer or Safari, and sometimes the credit card applications tend to glitch out in Chrome. Additionally, it would mean the world to me if you could subscribe to this podcast, leave a 5-star review, and share it with a friend. And if you would like to make even more travel hacking friends, please sign up for the Patreon to access our monthly masterclass hangouts. We dive deep into a particular points program each month, and you'll get to ask all of your travel hacking questions and enjoy being around other people who enjoy points and miles just as much as you and I do. If you would like an invite to the next one, head over to geobreezetravel.com/hangouts to sign up to be on the invite list. Take care and happy travels!